This is a dig at your incremental damage decks, your Lickitungs, your Ghastlies, your Electabuzz, pinging you for 10 or 20 damage with some bonus effect or the hopes of snowballing later in the game. For this deck, those types of attacks will serve only to make my rage more powerful. You want to ping me for 10? Alright, that's 10 more damage you're about to take. Thanks for the free plus power. Dodrio was already a solid card because of retreat aid, but it's seen a lot more play now because of its rage attack and its ability to handle all of these incremental attackers. But Dodrio is not the only Pokemon in base Fossil to have rage. We've also got Flames of Rage on this here boy, this Black Star promo Arcanine. It has less HP than base set Arcanine, but it has the ability to ping your opponent without having to discard energy. But much like Dodrio, it benefits from being pinged itself. For 2 fire energy, Flames of Rage is going to deal 40 damage. Already an amazing start. That's some great energy to damage output ratio there. You do have to discard both of those fire energy, but when you do so, you're dealing an additional 10 damage for each damage counter on Arcanine. So discard 2 fire energy, you're dealing base 40, but more realistically, you're looking at 60 plus for 2 energy, which is pretty hard to beat. And even on those turns after you attack, if Arcanine isn't knocked out, which early game it's probably not gonna be, you can retreat it to the bench for free if you've got a Dodrio in play. Even gives you an opportunity to let a Dodrio start absorbing some damage so it can get a rage attack off. In the meantime, you're going to be attaching fire energies back to Arcanine whenever you can. You get into this nice play loop of deal a bunch of damage, retreat to the bench, play it cool for a couple turns, back into the active, deal a bunch of damage. Because you're going for 2-hit KOs, your opponent's going to end up with just a bunch of damage on their board in the late game, where hopefully that cycle's still moving for you. Your opponent is out of Pokemon space on their side of the field, and you're just going to get knockout after knockout. This deck relies heavily on patience, strategic movement of your Pokemon, and appropriately choosing the right moments to attack. This is another one of those decks that has a slow start, but a huge payout in the mid to late game, as long as you can get energy onto the board and survive. With Rain Dance players being pushed out by the abundance of Lass, this fire type deck has the room to play this really fun hit and run strategy. A slow start fire type deck is going to be perfect for Fossil Magmar. Smokescreen is going to ping your opponent for 1 energy and potentially prevent an attack next turn. Then on your second turn attacking, Smog is going to ramp it up and really become a huge threat, dealing 20 damage and potentially poisoning. And that retreat cost of 1 is going to work very nicely with Dodrio. Magmar is your ideal start in this deck, but it's not going to be so bad starting with a Growlithe. As discussed in the previous Arcanine video, Growlithe is an evolving basic with 60 HP, making it a standout in base Fossil. Now you're not going to be able to attack on your first turn, but on your second turn you can evolve into Arcanine and attack with either Quick Attack or Flames of Rage. Probably Quick Attack, as Flames of Rage is going to want you to at least get a little bit of damage stacked on you. We're going to be running a 3-2-1 line of Arcanine, as I also wanted to include the base set Arcanine here, just so you just have that option of using Flamethrower or Takedown if you just really need some specific guaranteed numbers. The tanky 100 HP can also be a game changer in certain matchups. We're also going to have a 2-2 line of Dodrio, and Doduo's not a bad start either. I don't know that this deck has a bad starting Pokemon other than our final Pokemon, but we'll get to it in a second. Dodrio's going to be your secondary rage card that's still going to be able to deal big chunks of damage. And then rounding it out, we've got Ditto as a wild card. If you're playing a deck with double colorless energies, this is an easy include to use your opponent's own strategy against them when yours isn't working. Even though this is a rage-based deck, there's still a lot of versatility in what you can do amongst all these Pokemon. Now we start getting into our draw and search power with the importance of your draw power in this deck, maybe a little more than some others we've talked about, is resource replacement after you get hit with a Lass. There are some trainers in this deck that aren't necessarily essential, but they are extremely helpful in keeping you alive and dealing more damage off of Rage. Centering the deck around Rage does put you in an interesting position where you want damage counters on you because it's going to power up your attack, but also you're stacking damage counters on yourself, which makes you easier to knock out. So it's an interesting balance there of knowing which Pokemon you want to sponge up some damage so that you can attack with, but still keeping them out of potential knockout range. Pretty easy gameplay decisions to make when you are playing against those incremental decks that are relying on Lickitung and Electabuzz. But when you're staring down a promo Mewtwo or a Wigglytuff, it gets more difficult. You can definitely take 40 or 60 damage and retaliate for a knockout, but what then? It almost becomes a game of monitoring your opponent's resource management while you're managing your own. Energy retrieval is going to be a way to get all of these discarded energies back from Flames of Rage and Flamethrowers, keeping you stocked up on those fire energies so you can replenish more Flames of Rage. One of the ways you're going to try to manage the big hitters across the field that this deck isn't really built to handle, like Wigglytuff and your base set Arcanine decks, is just with good old energy removal. If you're worried about opposing energy removals or your opponent holding a bunch of plus powers in their hand, you can also hit them with a Lass. Using all the trainers you want on your turn and then using a Lass, shuffling any trainers that you may need later in the game back into your deck. That's also going to help keep your deck intact, keep you from decking out. One of those key trainers is going to be the few copies of Pokemon Center that we run in here. This is going to be your answer for, well, if I'm not attacking, I don't want to leave this Arcanine on my bench with no energy but 6 damage counters. While those 2 energy are discarded, go ahead and heal it up before you attach another. Make sure that you're always out of range from any attackers your opponent may have, a big one being Mr. Mime. A couple copies of Gust of Wind will also make sure that your Flames of Rage is landing on an optimal target. It's not going to be powerful enough to OHKO a Lickitung that's been stacking damage on you, but it's probably going to be enough to knock out something that's on the bench. Notably, your promo Arcanine only has a retreat cost of 1, so it can also benefit from Dodrio, getting it out of the active position quickly. If it's late game and a lot of your Pokemon already have damage stacked on them, and then your opponent drops a Mr. Mime, you want to gust that into the active position, retreat whatever you have in the active position, get a Magmar in there, and start hitting that thing with a Smog before it starts blowing up everything on your board. A full playset of double colorless energy so that your Dodrios can be attacking as soon as possible, but also so that your Ditto is going to be as powerful as possible, converting your double colorless energies into double rainbow energies. And then we're going to be finishing out the deck list with a whole bunch of fire energies. 14 of them. Before anyone asks, yes, this deck does get blown out by the other Arcanine deck in this series. If your opponent can drop Electrodes on their second turn, then they're going to be OHKOing everything in this deck. Aside from our 1 copy of base set Arcanine, but we don't have any means of energy acceleration, so they're still going to be outpacing us. Rage is an archetype that takes advantage of the slow, methodical nature of all of these mid-rangey or control-y decks, and it does a really good job at it. However, it doesn't really have an answer to explosive decks like Rain Dance and your Arcanine Electrode builds. Unfortunately, the answer to those explosive decks are either high bulk on your Pokemon, like with these big normal types, or a power wall like Mr. Mime. There's definitely room in the deck to play a couple of sponges, but you lose a lot of Pokemon mobility because of those high retreat costs, and it almost makes you have to run Switch somewhere in this deck too, detracting from one of the major strengths of this Rage deck, which is your ability to move between Magmar and Arcanine as attackers super smoothly as long as you have a Dodrio in play. So you can add bulk at the price of your fluidity, but I prefer to be able to move back and forth. I think that the Flames of Rage Arcanine and your Magmar are ample enough to keep your opponent busy without giving them too much time to build up their endgame setup. If you do anticipate playing in a Rain Dance metagame, you could alter the deck to try to get in a 1-1 or a 2-2 line of Muck. But against modern Rain Dance, you gotta be fast and you gotta be lucky just to get this into play fast enough to block Blastoise's Poké Power. As always, feedback is much appreciated. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Hit me with a like, a dislike, a share. And if you do like what I'm doing here with the vintage Pokemon TCG content, go check out the rest of my channel because there's a bunch of it on there and there's a bunch more on the way. I'll see you there. Ta-ta for now.